this is our presentation, but more of a webinar and a Q&A than a presentation, I hope, about Pupil Premium Plus, to make sure that you are absolutely sure what it is, how it's different to Pupil Premium, because it is, and not even all of schools understand that fully. So it's important that we support you to understand it, but also about the fact that we have made some changes to our policy, changes that were very right to the journey of Surrey Virtual School and Surrey County Council on the whole, and they will come into effect from September. Okay, so these are our objectives. So one is that Anwen did a very comprehensive Pupil Premium Plus review when she joined us as head, which was a year ago yesterday, she told us in our team meeting, which the time has flown. She spoke to children and young people, so we'll see those findings. She spoke to carers, she spoke to social workers, and she spoke to designated teachers, as well as us as the Surrey Virtual School team. So we'll be sharing those findings with you. We will also, I should have deleted the third bullet point, please ignore that. We will also, number 2, just be talking through the changes to the Pupil Premium Plus policy. There are some implications for practice, I guess, because obviously as carers, it's important that you have your say in PEP meetings and how the Pupil Premium Plus is spent, even though ultimately, you know, it's down to the designated teacher to apply for that and us to agree it. Okay, so you will see on your screen why we did the Pupil Premium Plus review. And it was basically that way back in 2018 now, as a result, or no, as part of the Ofsted, one of the comments that was made very clearly was that the local authority needed to better analyse and more closely monitor not just how the Pupil Premium Plus was spent, but also the impact of that spending. So, as you know, when we first kind of started as a new Surrey Virtual School, we had a certain policy, and that was that the monies must be spent very clearly and definitely on academic progress and attainment. As time has progressed and we have a much better and deeper understanding of how the money is being spent and the impact, we have been able to relax that a little bit, and so that you will see that more money being spent on more therapeutic aspects of the young person's life that will then mean better progress and attainment, better outcomes. I've mentioned what the review included. And just to kind of highlight that final bullet point, the whole of Surrey County Council, as you will know, is on a journey to get to good as per Ofsted and an inspection. We are part of that journey, so we're not inspected separately. We are part of that. And as part of that journey, that's why the review is held and is actually held annually, and why the policy changes as we move along that journey. Do we have any questions on any of that at the moment? Okay, I shall move on. So we are Anwen, as Virtual School Head, is part of a national association of virtual school heads, and we join together regularly. For example, I work with the secondary school representatives of the national virtual school headships. Cass, one of my colleagues who's covering for Helen Hale, she works with the primary school representatives. We all work with different virtual school heads in different ways, so that we're sharing good practice and we're learning how other authorities work. What we've got here is what the research that the virtual school heads have done, and the research that the Education Endowment Foundation has done on the best ways to spend and the best ways to use Pupil Premium Plus. I'll let you have a little read of those rather than read them all out. Okay, so just briefly, that first comment, virtual school heads have considered flexibility. That comes back to what I was saying earlier. So when we first started as the new Surrey Virtual School in May 2019, we had to be very, very tight and strict that it was only for very clear and direct interventions on attainment and progress that Pupil Premium Plus could be spent. As time's gone on and as more research has been done and as we've worked as part of the wider community, it's become very clear that, you know, all virtual school heads need to be more flexible about how Pupil Premium Plus is used, as long as the ultimate outcome is to improve education outcomes. It's not to be used in place of things that the school should already be providing. I think the best way to think about that is whatever we get asked for, our first internal response will be, is this something that the school is providing already for children who are not looked after? And if the answer to that is yes, then our answer to can we spend Pupil Premium Plus on this, the answer is no, because you should be providing it anyway. Pupil Premium Plus is to support the additional trauma and attachment issues that might manifest themselves in school because the child is looked after. So we won't kind of, that's how we look at it. It's an over and above, it's an extra because they have been through extra trauma. So that's where that kind of relates to. There is also a common theme there that nobody knows at the moment, including the researchers at the Education Endowment Foundation, what the impact really is, what the long-term impact certainly really is of Pupil Premium Plus spending. But what we kind of need to relay to you is that it is being researched. We are looking at it very carefully. I do a lot of work internally with Liz, our business manager, on looking at Pupil Premium Plus spend. And interestingly, one of the things is, and this is something when you go to PEPs that you can take with you, is to make sure that that Pupil Premium Plus money is being spent and being asked for, therefore, if it is needed to be used. A significant number of our schools, sorry about the background noise, a significant number of our schools actually don't spend the Pupil Premium Plus funding. So we need to make sure that they do. If there's an issue with the young person's reading, writing, maths, social, emotional, mental health, whatever it is, there is that funding there and it needs to be used, and it isn't being as widely used as we would like. Any questions on that?
I'm actually really sorry. I'm really pleasantly surprised to hear this because I know it's been really tight, and I think the spending on the social, emotional and mental health is really important sometimes to get that right first before they'll then engage in education.
Yeah, and we do wholeheartedly agree, and we did wholeheartedly agree with that back in May 2019 when we put our first new policy in place. But we needed to show first and foremost the direct impact on attainment and progress. But it's good, we've been able to kind of move away and relax things a little bit and show a bit more flexibility, as you say. Anything else on that one?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the comment you made about schools seemingly being reluctant to dip into the fund. I'm struggling to understand why that might be, because secondary school that my young person is in also gives me the impression that they do not want to access PPP. Is there any extra measures that you put in place if you release the funding? Is there extra paperwork or administration? It just seems to me that it's a silly to have a fund that people touch.
That's such a good question, actually. There's a couple of things to say on that. And Michelle, please jump in if you think of anything else as well. The first thing is, and I'll come to it later on, but we are going to change how we pay that funding, so that one of the 3 terms will be paid automatically and the other 2 will be paid through request. But I will come to that later on in the presentation. I think the second thing to say is that one of the ways that we say yes or no to Pupil Premium Plus when Michelle and her team quality assure every single PEP is that we look at, have they asked for Pupil Premium Plus? If the answer is no, Michelle and her team will go back to the attainment and progress grades, and also they'll have a sense of the young person in terms of their social emotional needs, and they will now be challenging the school. Well, why have you not requested Pupil Premium Plus? So schools will be getting a lot more challenge on that if that hasn't happened. In terms of the administrative process, there is no administrative process for schools. As long as they do the PEP, as long as they set the targets, and in the targets they request the funding, that funding is automatically paid to the schools. So there's nothing else they need to do paperwork wise. It's just part of the PEP process that they're doing anyway.
Okay.
The PEP does have to be of a good standard, though.
Say again, Michelle.
Sorry, the PEP does have to be of a good standard, you know, until the Pupil Premium Plus money is released.
Yeah.
So if it's not to a good standard, we will then chase that up with the designated teachers to get that up to standard, so that the children, young people, do not miss out on that funding. And yeah, as Stacey said, we go back and look at, if there isn't a request for Pupil Premium Plus, we will go back and look at the attainment section to see if there's a need for perhaps tuition in specific subjects, and even taking on board the child's wishes and feelings and areas that they have identified themselves that they're struggling with. That will be highlighted as a possible way to use Pupil Premium Plus.
Thanks, Michelle. I think the other thing to say as well, and again, there is a slide on this further in the presentation, but is that we use centralized pupil premium, so what we call a top slice. We also use that to set up strategies from the virtual school, and then through work such as mine, for example, and also through the ESOs like Michelle, knowing the individual young people, we spot where there is a need. So, for example, we're paying for additional personal coach, careers, post-16 planning, whatever you want to call it. We're paying for that centrally for year 11 and year 10s at the moment. And we're looking at their data and we're applying the knowledge that we have of them to actually go to their carer, designated teacher and social worker and say, look, we have this resource on offer. We think your young person would benefit from it. Can we engage you and them with it? So it kind of does work both ways. But it is important, I think, for you to know that we would prefer that the schools request Pupil Premium Plus, and they're not all doing it. And no, there isn't an administrative reason for that. Does that answer your questions for now on that one?
Yes, that's really interesting to hear that some of the money is paid automatically, and also my belief was that maybe the school was thinking if they requested the money, they were somehow obviously more accountable for the education and delivering the education. I don't know. I think there is a little bit of that wrapped up in it. It's, you know, if we don't ask for any money, we'll get left alone type thing.
Yeah, and I think you are potentially right on that, and that's why we have Michelle and her team going to as many of the PEPs as they can, but certainly reading every single PEP in detail every single term, because even if they don't request the money, that team goes through those PEPs with a fine-tooth comb, and if they don't think that they are sufficient, tight enough, detailed enough, then the challenge will be there, even if funding hasn't been requested. So there isn't a difference really whether they do or don't request it. Do you think that's fair, Michelle?
Yeah, and also just to add that we don't just kind of go back to schools and, you know, with regards to children using the Pupil Premium Plus for children that are perhaps not making enough progress, etc. We also suggest it when children are making progress and above expected progress, to extend their learning and further enhance their kind of career choices, I guess, in the future.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah. Okay, let's move on, but keep the questions coming. It's great. Really just a little bit, I won't go through this in great detail because we're getting into a lot of technicalities, but NAVASH, so that National Association of Virtual School Heads, I know that's going to make mine bark, never mind, we'll work on. They basically did some research into how Pupil Premium Plus was spent and the best ways that it was spent, and that research is here. There are lots of different aspects to it. I'll just let you have a little read and then we'll pick out a few. So I think there's a few interesting points here. One relates to exactly what you just said. I think it was you, Joe, about, you know, is it too complicated for DTs? If you look at the third bullet point, there is an argument for that. You know, and I'm from a secondary and a primary background. But if you think about a secondary school, they might have 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 young, you know, students. We generally speaking have 1, 2, maybe 3 looked after young people in their school, but there will be other looked after young people, and their PEP and the process for their PEP is at the moment different because every local authority does it differently. There's no centralized way of doing things. It's a bit like, you know, if you have children at 2 different primary schools, their reports are different, the times of their reports are different, some of the things that their reports include are different. It's the same type of thing. So yeah, there is a level of complication there, which is why we do offer an awful lot of training. But again, thinking of the designated teachers, thank goodness they now exist because they didn't always exist. They should be on the senior team, ideally, but again, that's not always the case. But again, that, you know, being a designated teacher, you're talking about 1 or 2 children per school. So it's not always, and it can't be, the biggest kind of day-to-day priority, and therefore sometimes emails and messages and so on can get missed. And I think that's just the real world, and we continue to find ways to work within that, including thank you for coming along today, because you are vital to making it all much easier. There are other different things included here. Again, if we look at, let me count down the bullet points. Bullet point 5. One of the ways that the virtual school is scrutinised is that we produce an annual report for the Corporate Parenting Board, which is the most senior people in Surrey County Council. Now, they ask us to show the impact of Pupil Premium Plus spend. They do exactly what every other local authority, Corporate Parenting Board do, but what they generally want to see, and this is the same across the country, are those outcomes. And actually, what about the progress that the young person has made in, for example, bullet point 5, their readiness to learn, their self-esteem, their confidence, etc., etc. So one of the things that we are going to do, working with social care, is we're going to look at reporting on and using what's called SDQ scores, which you've probably heard of, the Strengths Difficulties Questionnaires, so that we can show progress for the young people in more softer skills like their social, emotional and mental health. Again, it's a national issue, but we are part of trying to overcome that very much, because it is obviously just as important and arguably the thing that needs to happen first, of course. Is there anything else on any of that anybody wants to ask?
Can I just add into what you were just saying there? Because that's phenomenal hearing you talk about that, the focus on those other areas for our kids, which absolutely, I'm sure all the foster carers here would be in agreement about, and it's a relief to hear it. But our education system, particularly secondary schools, are focused on academic outcomes. Yeah. And when our kids are in those schools, they come under that. Yeah. So what I see as one of our huge challenges, and a massive challenge for virtual school, is educating schools to accept and to acknowledge and embrace the fact that we need to all focus on something different for our kids. You know, if they're great on the academic side and that feeds them, and then brilliant, fabulous. But yeah, the majority of the kids that I've taken care of, that's not been the case. It's
a really difficult area, and there is no answer, an easy answer, is there? And I've been through this myself personally. You know, obviously you're foster carers, my son's adopted, and I remember it was so valuable and so important, the nurture that was shown to him, for example, in primary school. But he's now nearly 18 and he still has to go out into the workplace or university or whatever it is with other nearly 18-year-olds. I mean, he's 15, but you know, you get the idea. So it's that very fine balance between celebrating the other progresses that have been made, but also making sure that schools don't go too far down that nurturing route that means that young person can't compete. It's all, you know, it's just that very fine balance. But at least what we are doing and what's happening nationally is trying to educate schools and those senior people in governments that just look at academic outcomes, that there are other measures of progress.
Yeah, sorry, Janice, before you say something, can I just come back on that? Because I totally get what you're saying, Stacey, about, you know, there's a real world out there and we need to help prepare our kids for it. But I mean, I've not seen a secondary school yet that's been in danger of going too far down the nurturing route.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I suppose that was more primary.
What I've been faced with is trying to keep a child alive, you know, stopping them step to that place where their mental health is deteriorated so much. And the school, I mean, Michelle worked with me with one of these children, and, you know, the school were not on board, and eventually the placement broke down and the child's now in residential care. That's not, I feel strongly that the school was a factor in that.
Can I just totally agree with Susanna, really, because I've sat on Foster Network presentations from university people who said actually our children do as well, but they might do it as well 5 years later. And you know, and I think sometimes the expectation is, let's bridge this gap, let's close this gap, let's catch them up. And the reality is there's too much pressure. They're not going to close the gap in the time frames available. They should almost be doing O levels at A level age, and vice versa. And we should give them the opportunity to do that. Not that they do need the nurture now, and actually the too much focus on catching them up, it's just never going to happen, or it's too much pressure. And it just needs to be more time focused, thinking actually, does it matter if they go to university at 18 or at 21, if that's what they want to do, or does it matter? Because yes, I do, but with Spain put, they do have the opportunity, and if they don't do their GCSEs at 18, or like my own son was a lady little toad, and he failed his maths and English. Well, he failed his maths, I don't know, one of them. So he had to retake it. But you can retake it the next year or the next year, and does it really matter if they're doing it while they're doing BTEC or something later down the line? There's just too much pressure on them, and not. I think we do need to be focusing with Pupil Premium sometimes on the nurture and making sure schools are just not outcome focused.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, that it's not about being just outcome focused, and that's really what this review showed us, and what all the national research is saying, and what everybody kind of new, but it's all part of, you know, it's coming more to the forefront now because it's part of everything that we've been through with the pandemic, that about young people's mental health. It's part of a national issue, whether the young person is looked after or not, isn't it? I was having a conversation with my neighbour the other day, and he was saying his son was devastated at football on Sunday morning because he wasn't on the leadership board. And I was like, but Lewis is great at football. And he said, yeah, but he's a defender. So the leadership board was all about the scores on the board for everyone who'd scored goals. And he's a defender, and there was, you know, different skill, equally vital. So it's prevalent in our society, isn't it? And that is definitely what we're talking about here, and why we are more relaxed. It doesn't mean to say, what I don't mean is that we shouldn't nurture, and you know, I certainly didn't mean to come across kind of saying that. I guess what we're saying here is we want to make sure that everything is done to give the young people that, you know, the option that if they need to take longer, they can take longer, within the confines of our national system. And I have to say that at the present time, the back yearing research, so if you wanted to repeat a year, that does very strongly suggest that back yearing doesn't work, because, you know, you're not healing the young person, you're not solving their barriers to learning, you're just potentially making them live through it all again. It's got to be part of a bigger plan. Michelle, I think you wanted to say something, did you, or was I wrong?
No, yeah, sorry, I didn't.
You didn't? Okay. Right, we'll move on.
Sorry.
Because, yeah,
Sorry,
go
one
on.
more.
No, go on.
One more thing. It doesn't actually have to be about holding them back, does it? Because if they go to college with their peers, they can still retake, or they can take their GCSE English.
The difficulty we have is just to kind of speak about our young people not achieving GCSEs in year 11 and then being able to take them. A lot of our children find that very, very difficult to go on to college and redo maths and English, and can almost be to the point where it will put them off attending that college course that they want to do. So that's kind of why we try and encourage our children to achieve the GCSE in year 11, so they don't have to do that again, and it doesn't put them off going to college.
I get that. So we're focusing it so maybe they only do 2 or 3 GCSEs and make sure they get maths and English.
Yeah.
And not overwhelm them with 9.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, that's part of the work that we are doing with our year 11 into 12 is having very forensic, detailed conversation about things such as that, reducing the number of GCSEs. But then again, you have the argument, quite rightly, that actually, you know, and I come back to my own son, and you'll recognise this, that he could not work any harder in maths, but he isn't going to get a 4. Now, should he miss out on his GCSE drama and art, which he loves, in order to do more maths? So there's always different sides of every, you know, way of doing things. And that's why it's really good to have you guys along and advocating for the young people, because at least then it puts all these thoughts out there, and a good discussion is had and a joint decision is made for that young person. I think that's the key, isn't it? Right, I'm just going to leave this on the screen. So this is, as part of the Pupil Premium review, this was the feedback that the designated teachers gave. Quite a stark figure on bullet point 3, 36%, we've talked about it already, state that they only sometimes or they rarely request Pupil Premium Plus. So we've talked about that, but that's the figure.
I think it's quite sad that the therapeutic interventions have been turned down, or were originally in the past not seen as appropriate.
I think to address that, Janice, you are correct. And like we said earlier, when we started as the new virtual school and we tightened things up and had to, at that point, make it very clear the definite link between the money spent and an academic intervention. That was to do with kind of years of a lack of being able to show impact, which Ofsted told us wasn't okay. But I think it's also part of this national issue that we mentioned earlier, that it's very hard to show the impact of therapeutic interventions in terms of outcomes. And that's why we're trying to educate the powers that be nationally about the fact that you can't always show the progress in terms of figures and datas and my beloved Excel spreadsheets. But we have listened to, and we are continuing to listen to the feedback from people saying that more therapeutic interventions are needed. So, we've put various things in place this year, for example, like the offer of the animal therapy that exists for some young people and is working with one of our primary schools in Woking, where they have a significantly higher number of looked after and previously looked after children. That's an example, but it's also happening in other ways, certainly in individual schools. Bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the one that says about Pupil Premium Plus being allocated to children who have EHCPs. So I'm going to talk about that more. That there is a slide about that coming up, because I know that has been contentious at times. So we will address that as we go through the presentation. Anything that anyone wants to mention there? Okay. So this is children and young people. I'll let you have a read and then I'll pick out bits. Okay, so we spoke with our 3 care council, well, Anwen spoke with our 3 care council groups. So that includes care leavers, so the older young people, and the care council juniors as well. And this was some of the feedback that we got from them, or a summary of it. So there's a bit there about transition resources, moving from year 6 into 7. This year, I hope you know, if you have a young person in year 6, we're doing a huge variety of things as part of the year 6 into 7 transition programme, including a 2-day summer school, which is not a summer school, it's a summer extravaganza, where we're really looking to develop confidence, self-esteem, and get them kind of year 7 ready in that way, but also looking at academic enrichment. And that's for all of our young people, even if they are, as Michelle mentioned earlier, working at their chronological age-related expectations, as it's called. We're doing enrichment work with them. So there's all kinds of different offers there. They want us to look a little bit more at after school clubs and trips and things like that. So again, that's partly why we've started with a 2-day event for year 6 in the summer. We've done an awful lot of work to increase the number of one-to-one tutors available. And that's really been by educating schools on the national tuition programme. We certainly wouldn't have been able to do as much as we had it not been for the national tuition programme. But a lot of schools were not aware of that. So we've done a lot of educating there. Care leavers, listening to that, there will be much more work done around the options for care leavers, just to prepare them for moving on. And that includes university or not university, the different routes that are available. as you know, or maybe you don't know, but post 16 are not currently eligible for Pupil Premium Plus funding. That's a national thing. It's outlined by the government. However, there is the vulnerable learners bursary that they can apply for, and they do that through their college. So it's similar, but not quite the same. Any questions there? One of the things, that bit about preparing young people for the demands of moving on, we're doing quite a bit of work with our young people that live in the children's residential homes with short course ASDANs, and that's looking at independent living. It's some of them are doing a short course animal management certificate simply because they have pets, for example. So we're doing, again, that's an example of a bit of how we're spending some of that funding centrally. We have joined ASDAN. I've trained myself up so that things like that can be offered to the young person. So there's a bit more rounded spending of Pupil Premium Plus. Okay. So there we go. There's some figures for you there. Have a little read, and again, we'll pick up on those. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to pick out a few of these, but if I don't pick out something that you want to mention, please just shout out. So bullet point 3, I've mentioned before about the EHCPs. So within an EHCP, when that's awarded and there's money attached to that, the school has to evidence how it is already providing £6,000 worth of additional support for that young person. Then the young person gets the EHCP. And therefore, we said originally that until that could be evidenced, how all of that was being spent to support the young person, then we wouldn't give schools more money unless they could say how it had all been spent and still there was a shortfall. We wouldn't give more money. So that was the blanket thing that we said. However, we have always said, if you can evidence how all of the money you are already receiving is being spent to support that young person, and you still require more through Pupil Premium Plus, then we will say yes to that. And we have done on a huge number of occasions. But that is changing. So we're now going to say that, yes, as part of the standard PEP process, you can request Pupil Premium Plus money if your young person has an EHCP. We still expect to see how it is different, how it's going to be spent differently, and how the other EHCP money's already been spent, but you can request it. And I guess we're just... the outcome is the same, that you've always been able to request it, but the message of it being a yes rather than a no, perhaps that's changed. If I just skip ahead, if you look there, this is the type of thing that we will expect schools to do if the young person has already got an EHCP.
Sorry, Stacey, Janet's got her hand up.
Yeah, go on, Janet.
Can I just say, are they allowed under EHCPs to spend the additional funding on the emotional social support that you're now extending your remit to? Or is it that they will fund all the educational one-to-one support, but they can still apply for the extra Pupil Premium for the emotional and social part?
No, it's not as simple as that. So an EHCP, the money that comes with an EHCP has to be spent on the child's individual targets within that EHCP. Now, you can get an EHCP for social, emotional, mental health needs. So it's not clear cut. If there is a target in the EHCP that relates to social, emotional, mental health, then the money must be spent on that need.
Okay, thank you.
No problem at all. I mean, you're going to get a copy of these slides, and I am conscious of time. it's important to say bullet point 3 there, which is that if a young person is in a specialist school, so a school where Surrey County Council are paying an annual fee for them to attend, then the short answer to can they have Pupil Premium Plus funding will be no, because they are already being paid to meet all of the needs of that young person. However, as we've always said, it's a case-by-case thing. So if there is an additional need on top of that, we may consider it.
Janice has got another question.
Go on, Janice.
Sorry, does that also include private schools? Because there are the very odd occasion where we have children where the parents are already paying for private school.
Yeah.
Do they can they still apply for Pupil Premium for extra support of the emotional?
So again, it's a kind of different. It's difficult to say because it's case by case. Again, if we are paying for that private education, which we might be on very unusual but odd circumstances, depending on how that young person has ended up in care, then it is likely that we would say no.
But if they're paid for by the parents or by a bursary because the school are giving them a free place?
That's right, exactly. If that is the case, then the answer is possibly yes. So, for example, we've got 2 young people who are going to Epsom College this year on scholarships, which Epsom College are fully funding. And if there is an additional need on top of that, then yes, we would say yes. So, for example, we are funding some training for all of their staff. So that all of their staff understand, obviously they're great with attachment issues already working with boarders, but understand the trauma that our young people may have experienced and how that looks and manifests itself for each young person. So we're doing it that way. So we're kind of being more proactive. But if there's an individual need for one of those 2 young people, then the chances are we would say yes, because they are already funding the scholarship. Does that make sense and answer your question?
Thank you.
No problem.
The request, just to say though, the request would need to show that it's the needs are a barrier to the child or young person being able to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing to say is that there has always been a national kind of grey area about children in reception year. So Pupil Premium Plus funding is actually only available once that young person turns 5, which means where you have 4-year-olds in reception, reception teachers or designated teachers for those 4-year-olds have never been clear about can they get Pupil Premium Plus funding, or is it paid directly to the school the way it is for preschool and nursery and things like that. So we've changed the policy this year, and we've just said the moment that a young person enters reception, whether they are 5 or not, their PEPs will be the same as they are all the way through to the end of year 11. So 3 PEPs a term, and yes, we will pay Pupil Premium Plus funding if you request it. And part of us being able to do that is by redirecting some of the kind of top slice funding that we take off at the start of each year for those young people with much higher needs, or to fund things like this additional funding in year R. Right, the only other thing that I want to make sure that I say, and then I will take questions, is that from the autumn term there will be a new policy which I've talked about, and that's where the changes will come in place, and teachers have been trained and so on. Now, teachers have only been trained on the policy if they've come to our training. And we've advertised the training many different times and in many different ways, but that doesn't mean that teachers read these things, as you know. So if your teacher, your designated teacher, is not aware of these changes, it's brilliant that you're here to make them aware of that, and we'll continue to try and do the same. But from September, there will be a £600 payment made to every young person, apart from those that we've mentioned that are not eligible. Every young person in school straight away in the autumn term. Now, we're doing that this year in the autumn term because basically we want to make sure that if there are barriers of administration or complications or whatever that DTs feel they're facing, our young people are not missing out. But the school is getting the money, it's there in their pot, they don't have to ask for it. Yes, we want to know how it was spent and the impact of it, of course, but they are automatically getting the funding. Spring and summer 22 will be the same as it has been now, which is, you know, through the targets and linked to the attainment and progress. So that was
Stacey.
yeah,
Joe's got her hand up.
Oh, go on, Joe.
Hi, Stacey. Just picking up on your comment about training for designated teachers.
Yeah.
Obviously, policies are changing and there are updates that they should be aware of. Am I to assume that they have had a level of training before they even become a teacher? No.
No. So they, having been a teacher trainer myself, I can tell you that there is no part of the teacher training curriculum that teaches about looked after children and the trauma that they may have experienced. You might have some teacher training places that will do that because they're exceptionally good. When they become a designated teacher, we would expect that they will come on training with us, and in fact we've just put on another 2 sets of designated teacher training because more and more schools are doing that and basically fulfilling a professional duty. However, there is no statutory training that they have to go through at the moment, and that's something that Anwin, as part of her membership with the National Virtual School Heads, that's something that she's fighting to change. Because in a school, you'll have heard the term safeguarding lead. Well, that safeguarding lead has to attend statutory training every year, or they can't be safeguarding lead. So we want the same weighting to be given to saying that a designated teacher can't be a designated teacher unless they've undergone a certain amount of training. At the moment, that doesn't exist, but it's part of something that we're fighting to achieve.
But the training is there if the designated teacher wishes to access it.
Yes, yeah. So we do lots of different training every term. We do new to role, and we do things like this, policy updates and things like that. So Anwin trained a host of designated teachers a couple of weeks ago, last week, I think. No, it can't have been, it was half term the week before. But it relies on teachers to read their emails, to read our newsletters, you know, things like that, to be in touch with people like Michelle and to, you know, for them to be having a conversation about training. I mean, Michelle goes back to designated teachers where the PEP is not of sufficient quality, and she says, you know, this is the feedback, this is why it's not of sufficient quality. Oh, and by the way, this is when our next designated teacher training is. But it is a lead a horse to water scenario.
And also putting the onus on the carer, not that the onus is on us, but to have that diplomatic conversation with a designated teacher to suggest that they actually haven't been through the training, they don't know what they're doing, seems a bit scary to me.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to suggest that. What I meant was that because you're here today, you now know, for example, that school, your child's school, will have received £600 in the autumn term. Yeah. So therefore, in a PEP, you can now say, you know, the £600 Pupil Premium Plus. How has that been spent? Cool. We will ask that questions, and it's absolutely not up to you to ask that question. But if you felt able to, by coming along today, you now know about the £600.
No, it definitely gives me, you know, a conversation starter, saying that I've I've obviously been here. Did you know type thing.
Yeah, that's it. That's it, on nail on the head, a conversation starter, a did you know type thing. Exactly. Right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. It is 12:30. Thank you very much. I'm going to offer questions, but I'm also aware, obviously, that we're at our deadline. So, Janice.
I noticed